Dr. Brett, have you ever loved someone or something that you discovered over time, despite many promises, ideas of promises, or maybe just your own fantasies? You discovered didn't love you back and probably was never going to? I'm talking about, Dr. Brett, unrequited love. And I know that Ethan Hawke recently told us that it is better to have loved than never to have loved at all. And I think he's right. But I find myself currently in a situationship. While the other side of this might be the memories and the experience and the joy, the living of it all. In the middle of this relationship, which feels rather toxic, against my better judgment, I am doing the things that I would never tell my friends to do. I am putting up with things that are quite absurd. And as I talk to you about other people's relationships, I feel like, Dr. Brett, it's time that you and I talk about my relationship, my toxic relationship, that is, with academia and my job, and the sad realization that it probably never has and never will love me truly back. This is the Doc to Doc podcast.
It's voice notes turned podcast. Place as perspective. Welcome back to the Doc to Doc podcast. My name's Brett, and I'm coming to you from a very pleasantly temperatured Anaheim, California. Oh, a lie. Fullerton, California. Southern California.
Too many lies. Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm coming at you from a sunny and warm Washington, D.C.
So, Nicole, we've spent some time on the pod talking about mid-men, mid-relationships, some of the self-reflection that goes along with being in those relationships, what draws us to folks that maybe are not the best fit for us. When I was listening to your voice note this week, I was thinking about how you're expanding on thinking about relationships beyond just people, but also situations. So just kind of curious, like what was coming up for you?
Yeah, my situationship with work. Where to begin? Well, I should probably disclose that as much as we want it, this probably is not our capitalism episode, but
Not yet. We'll get there.
Everything is capitalism, so it's there. It's just not the focus. But I think I have been thinking about my relationship with work, and I've been thinking about the toxic relationship that I have with my work. So I want to talk a little bit about that. But really where this started is I was thinking about, and I don't want to make light of it, so I'm laughing, but it's not because I think that it's not serious. But you know how in the past few years, people, researchers, pundits have discussed teenage girls and their toxic relationship with Instagram, and that and it's something that's hard for me to relate to because I've just, as a millennial, and we've talked about like what it means to be a millennial, like my life has been online for most of it, and in the cringy part. So I don't relate to the curation of like the perfect social media profile as much. But I think about that and I'm like, oh, I don't know what that means. But then I think about, I do have a toxic social media relationship in LinkedIn. And so I've been thinking about this and like maybe doing a little bit of Freudian psychoanalysis. But I think my toxic relationship is like with LinkedIn and with Google Scholar, which
It's funny because one, I don't use Google Scholar because I haven't published very much. And also I feel like I don't want to open up that can of worms of starting to see like, do I have any relevancy? But I'm very dependent on your usage of LinkedIn because
that's true.
I do not use it. It does not make me feel very good the times that I do pop into it. But I do check to see if you have posted something about the podcast. And then for the most part, I just repost it and I don't even add anything. And I'm like, Nicole's words are very sufficient.
So it's like, I'm trying to think of the equivalent, but for a long time, same thing. I had a LinkedIn. I created one however many years ago for the purpose of this will help with some job search I was on. Oh. Then I went to graduate school and there's absolutely no reason, or I didn't find any reason to be online in this self-promoting way because I was like, real academics don't even use
Mm,
LinkedIn, like this isn't how I'm going to get a job as some recruiter is going to find me. Like we'll talk about academic workplace and promotion dynamics. And so it's not a place that I ever thought, oh, I'm going to get scouted here. But then when I got into my role in academia as like a faculty member and being part of particular units, it has exploded in this, it feels kind of like an old school Facebook wall.
yeah.
I don't want to like say the obvious, but everyone is on there. And so in my current role, I have been asked to be active in promoting things,
Mm,
particularly as I've been part of some publications and other research outputs. So I find myself having to check in because people in my unit are tagging me in things and sending me messages. And so I have been hooked into it and I hate it. So I was with you where I'm like, I didn't like it. I was minimally on here. I probably did need to update a lot of stuff for a long time, but it was bare bones. And
yeah.
so it got me in, and it is toxic because I go on there and I imagine this is what the girlies have felt on Instagram that I've been blessed to not be part of that hyper self-awareness. But I go on and I just feel like a piece of shit that has
Yeah.
never done anything with my life, and I'm not going anywhere, and I'm a big failure, like loser on my forehead. And at the same time, I also do go on Google Scholar, which is more academic-y and like actually is something that like people will look at your citation index, which is
Yeah.
for non-academics, how many times the percentage of your work that's cited over time, like per individual article or chapter or book or whatever. And I will go on that and I will look at my count, and sometimes I'll see it go up and I'll be like, I'm doing so well.
Mm,
This is so good. And then I will, just I'm a nosy girl. It's part of me. I love to look somebody up. I love to look somebody up on Google Scholar and I'll be like, I graduated at the same time as so and so.
mm,
What are they doing? And it's in this way, it's so social media adjacent. It's the
yeah.
same thing. So I'll look it up and I'll be like, shit. Like once again, I'm a failure,
Mm,
big loser on my forehead, never done anything right. And it is so toxic. And anyway, I think about it and I'm laughing through the pain, but this is my toxic situationship that I have is like both something that is somewhat necessary to my workplace, but is also a product of the work that I do.
And it's interesting that you are putting it through this lens, how we are judging younger generations and the curation on Instagram. I do very much think that the way that a lot of folks are using LinkedIn now is very reminiscent of Facebook. I hadn't really thought about
Yeah.
where it is those kind of constant updates and look at what I've been up to, or look at me at this event. And interestingly, I don't think I've really made this connection intentionally in my head yet, but the thing that makes me feel bad about Instagram is the same thing that makes me feel bad when I engage with LinkedIn, is looking at those internal analytics when they tell me how many people are looking at the posts. And obviously, I know LinkedIn probably is punishing my posts because I don't post enough. So they're
Mm,
not pushing it out to people's feeds. But the
yeah.
like, how many impressions have you had is one, I don't care, but I also do. It like makes me feel bad. But also when LinkedIn wants to show me how many searches I've shown up with, how many people have looked at my profile, like who are they, where are they from? That's how they try to get you to buy premium, so you can see very specifically who's looking at you. But it's the same, it is that exact same thing that makes me feel really bad about myself with Instagram, when I can see how many people liked a post, how many people looked at my stories, who's hearting it,
Mhm.
or like sending reactions. And like there are times where I'm looking to see if very specific people have looked at it and reacted. And that just, it is the worst, like the worst possible way that I could be treating myself, is to try to get that validation from other folks.
Yeah.
And that's not even to talk about like how Instagram is feeding me things that are, and hilariously using the word feeding, that are exacerbating my body dysmorphia, my eating disorder, my mental illnesses. And like trying to create healthy boundaries with social media, I think could be a whole other topic. But thinking about how LinkedIn is playing into that kind of lizard brain aspect of self affirmation, and is kind of designed to like make us feel bad about where we are
Mhm.
in terms of our careers and professionalism and successfulness and things like that. And so This is a very interesting place to start this conversation.
Yeah, and I think, like, fundamentally, if I didn't need to be on LinkedIn because of exactly what I've mentioned, what you've now thought of as well, the connections to the original or the early days of Facebook, if I didn't need to be on it for other people, I wouldn't, and I know that it would bring me so much more peace just to not have to engage with it because it is so self gratuitous in a way that I've personally never felt the need to self promote. I mean, there is a lot of pride that one has like in their work, or that like I certainly feel like very happy to share big wins, and it's best that's what LinkedIn allows you to do, or at least with the posting that people are always saying like, oh, I did this, I did that, but like that doesn't come naturally to me, but I feel the need of being on the platform to do more of that. But
Mm,
then on top of that, because of the nature of the job that I'm in, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about academia, it's a place where there can sometimes be very big moments of feast, and most of the time it's famine. And so in those long stretches of time, because of the way work happens, the way that publishing happens, the way that scholarship is produced, which is intentionally slow and deliberate and specific and scientific, like in those moments where, which sometimes are months, where like nothing actually is coming out, and it's very soul crushing. And I've tried to think about it in different ways of reorienting how I'm thinking about my relationship with LinkedIn, which is really just to say, like, this is actually a way that I relate to and struggle with my relationship with work, and something that, like, I want to love, I want to be a part of, but like doesn't love me back. So I've been trying to think about strategies to understand my relationship with my job and with work, and yeah, by extension, something like LinkedIn, in different, more healthy ways. But at the same time, it's like, this is where the relationship, I'm like, I don't know. I think somebody would tell me, like, get out of this relationship if they heard about it, because they'd be like, this
mm,
is not a good place to be. And yet, I love it so much. I don't want to leave it. But it doesn't love me back, really,
right.
or it gives me just enough to keep me hanging. So this metaphor, I don't know if it's complete, but it certainly, I feel like I'm in a bad relationship with LinkedIn, which is really just a microcosm of like, I am in an unhealthy relationship, perhaps committed and long term, with my job and with the workplace that I'm in.
And it's an interesting metaphor because thinking about it as a relationship, you see the potential in that work environment. Academia has been inspiring, has been world building. There's all of these positive aspects to it. Thinking about it as a relationship, though, there has to be give and take. Is there, when we think about us as professionals, as workers, what is our capacity to shape that environment or to get it to evolve and grow? And sometimes we are not positioned to do that. So what I think I want to do is I want to share a little bit about how I saw academia and
Mm.
why it shaped some of my choices. And I'm curious how some of these ideas sit with you because you are in academia. You have more traditional academic positions right now, whereas I'm more adjacent, even though
Sure.
I work at a university, but I work in student affairs. I am technically adjunct in a department, but for a lot of reasons, and we may get into some of those in this conversation, I've been offered a class, but it has not met enrollment at two different times.
Yeah.
And that is for some political reasons. So my connection to academia is a little more at arm's length. But when I was going into the doctoral program in which you and I met, I was not attached to a particular outcome. And I think you very much had your goals. And it's not to say that one approach is right or wrong. It's just what was right for us. And some of the folks that were in our colleagues, cohort members, years before and after us that had very, very specific outcomes that they were working towards, I saw some of those folks engage with the program differently, sometimes struggling with it, sometimes, they met their goals and their timelines differently. For me, I was trying to just enjoy the process. I wanted to read, write, and think and get paid to do that for a few years, and had told myself that what comes next, it'll present itself through the process. But I was pretty sure that I did not want to go the tenure track faculty route, knowing what I knew of academia. The idea of publish or perish is so uninteresting to me. It's one of the reasons why I started my own website in order to put content out there, because I didn't want paywalls. I didn't want 3+ year delays on when things would become accessible, because I write for impact. And that's not to say that traditional publishing can't have impact, but it looks different. I was a part of a research study before I started doing my own work, where we were given survey data from this organization that was collected, I want to say in like 2017, 2018, let's say. We got a hold of it in 2019. We were writing it for a while. It finally came out, I think, in 2022. So people were reading about data that was 4 years old. And it was particularly about experiences of race and ethnicity of youth. And by the time it came out and were reading it, the George Floyd uprisings had happened. Youth experiences of race had fundamentally shifted. And this research did not account for it. And we published through a much more accessible journal that had a much, much quicker process than a lot of the more traditional journals. And so I knew that part wasn't for me. But then also the politics of a lot of departments is not inherently about the work. It's not about folks' connections or relationships with the students or how we are serving and benefiting the students. It's very much just workplace politics, but in a different setting. And because of the work that many folks are focused on, can kind of fool themselves into thinking that the politics are of a higher caliber. It's not like watching The Office workplace dynamics, but it really is no different. But in a lot of ways, the stakes are higher because we're educating the future. And it just didn't seem like a place where I felt like I could do valuable work in the way that would feel valuable to me.
Yeah. No, I think that hitting a lot of notes there, Dr. Brett. Perhaps let me approach this because I think I heard a question in there or an invitation to say something about
Yeah.
my experience. Let me approach this maybe differently because I know that a lot of members of our current podcast audience are academics. So I don't want to repeat, but I also want to be aware that like not everyone we know, and thank goodness for this, like, oh, thank goodness not everyone is in academia. For the folks that aren't, I guess like maybe I need to tell you who I'm in a relationship with and maybe like tell you a little bit about what they do and who they are and how I met them, because it probably will, as you're listening, will be like, that's not it. Or maybe you'll be like, babe, that's a winner. So, okay. So I came into academia. I think I've talked about it on the pod. I knew that I wanted to go to grad school for the purpose of pursuing a traditional faculty job in a university, probably right at the end of undergrad. I was thinking for a long time I was going to go to law school. I always knew that I wanted to achieve the highest level in terms of like letters in school. And also, I've talked about this, I fucking love school. So it's like staying in school sounded like a great idea. But I knew that I wanted to go not the law school route because I had a colleague, a great professor, now a super good friend who should be a friend of the pod, but he won't listen to it. My friend Jack, who was ended up being my master's advisor, was like, look, you're really in love with the thinking, writing, reading process. And, this is the itch that law school will scratch. This is the itch that academia will scratch. And I think like he said, you're too smart for law school, which I at the time thought like, wow, I'm so intelligent. But
you didn't want to do the Justice Studies joint JD PhD? Like, what a
I did
fucking
actually apply
nightmare that
for
sounds like.
JD, PhD
Oh,
programs. I was thinking about that. But anyway, I think at the time, young Nicole was flattered that someone said that she was super smart. But I mean, what I realize now is basically he was just saying like, your brain is approaching questions differently. So this might be a good route for you. So I knew that I wanted to do the academic route coming out of undergrad, had a horrible undergraduate experience. So that was like a combination of things, but C's get degrees, folks. So I stand on that. So I went to my master's program knowing that it was going to be the place that I was going to try to learn the talk of becoming an academic, because I'm a first gen. This is not something that my family is used to. And it's surprising how like elitist, even as expansive as public, like higher education can be. And I work for a public institution, like how elitist this still is in terms of, a category that not everyone in our society gets to, and how hard it is to kind of crack the code of success to, like, I don't know, be I'm trying to think. I'm trying to keep the metaphor going, but if it loses, I don't know, insert some kind of metaphor of like the dating pool. So I go to grad school, and I think I spend a master's. I spent a lot longer compared to what people told me I should do going to school, learning the talk, and then I went into my PhD. And like you, I was like, this is a great space to like think and read and write, and I get paid to do this for a bit, and that was great. So I was hooked though. Like, I mean, whatever this relationship was selling me, as soon as I found out this was a possibility, I was like, this hits everything for me. I get to think, I get to read, I get to write, I get to be in the classroom, I get to teach, and I'm constantly engaged in a process of learning. And so I think at its best, this relationship that I have with academia, or that most of us, the reason why we're compelled to come into it is because it quenches a particular thirst of this sort of insatiable appetite for learning and wanting to think about things. And I think for many of us, not everyone, but like I, in good faith, think a lot of people who go into academia also believe that this is the place where you are part of knowledge generation, creation, and synthesis that has the power to change the world, whether it's somebody's scientific discovery or, getting someone to think differently about something. I'm in the social sciences and the humanities adjacent, but I think like across the board, people that are scientists love to learn and want to make the world a better place by learning new things and sharing that. But that's like when my relationship is treating me great, is like published a new article, got a book contract, like doing great. But what you've hinted at and what is the reality is that like it takes forever to get things out into the world, which is both important and deliberate at times, but also inflated. And so for folks who don't know, like if you go into a traditional academic path, which is what I've tried to do, the way you're evaluated to be successful, to promote in ranking or to maybe achieve tenure, which is kind of the old school highest goal that you can achieve at an institution, you are evaluated on your research output, which is how many journal articles are you publishing, or books, or both. These have to go through peer review, which, as Brett said, can take, you send out something to be reviewed by your peers. It's a blind review process in most cases. It can take a couple of months to get back. Brett and I were just talking prior to the pod for my book manuscript that I submitted last year. I submitted it in April. I did not receive reviews back until February of this year. And that's how long it took people to review it. I don't know why. It doesn't make sense, but it's really long. And from the time that like I got my book contract to the time that it's published, I started working on this book in 2024, I think, is when you and I were writing our manuscripts together. I don't
And
think
that's
it's
even
now.
that we were doing revisions on
Right.
our dissertations. If you include like the years of development and, it's
Yeah.
significantly longer, but yes, from the point that it
From
became its new form.
That was 2024. By the time it comes out, if I'm lucky, it comes out next year in 2027. It could very well come out in 2028. And the subject matter in that, some of what I'm writing about, is exactly what happened on the night of the 2024 elections. Will come out by the time we have, hopefully,
Yeah.
another set of elections. So it's a elongated period of time. That's research. You have service, which is, service that you might do, again, kind of free labor, doing positions of usually being on a committee or something that you're giving back that, you kind of just expect it's for the good of the department or whatnot, but it actually tends to be not valued very much, which is interesting. We can
Yeah.
come back to that.
And I think we should come back to service because interestingly, I have been finding over the last, like this academic year in particular, when the end of last academic year was so difficult for me, the things that have been both rejuvenating in my job and life-saving for me as a person are the things that would fall under that category of service that are kind of a part of my job description, but are not the essence of it, are the things that would be a little bit more dismissed when I put them on my CV, which is mentorship and the
Yeah.
opportunities to be human with my student staff to support their growth and development as people and professionals. And it is incredibly time consuming and is a different kind of work. And exactly like what you're saying, the most valuable things to us as people are the things that are least valued as an occupational obligation.
Right. Which leads me into mentorship and teaching. Sometimes they're coupled with service. Teaching is also its own separate bucket. I think most anyone who's ever been at a campus of any kind, community, public, state, whatever institution you've been to, if you think about a university, you probably think about the lecture hall, and that's your point of exposure. When you're a student, you might go to office hours, you might go to other events, but I think most of us, especially in undergrad, we go to a lecture, we interface with the teacher, and we think that's the primary thing that they're doing. Like service, it is part of how you're evaluated for promotion, but it is less valued at most institutions. And there are like degrees of kinds of universities and spaces of public higher education, but I'm thinking, for to not get in the weeds of that, we'll keep it simple of saying at most institutions, it's also not valued that much, which is crazy because like the clients that you serve at a university are students. So you have these human components that are undervalued. And then you have the research part. And then the last part is funding. And this is how much money that you can generate. I think there is a misconception that academics are just like all super wealthy and, wearing tweed blazers that cost us $600 a pop and,
You
live
love a
in.
tweed blazer, though.
I do love a tweed blazer. And I would love to spend $600 a pop, Brett. But the reality is, you don't make that much money in
Yeah.
academia. Most of people
Thrift
don't.
store tweed blazers.
It is secondhand. We love a good thrift. But the funding that you have to bring in is depending on how many students you want to work underneath you. So PhD or graduate students often are paid by individual professors or lines that they bring in. Departments recognize you for how much money you can bring in because that means that they don't have to generate that revenue with tuition or institutional dollars. So you are evaluated on your ability to fundraise essentially for your research and on behalf of the department.
And not only that, because yes, when faculty are able to get external funding for their studies, it
And
often helps pay for labor,
yeah,
but also the university is going to take a
yeah,
8 to 20% cut
exactly.
in order to be the administrators of that funding. So the funds come into the university and you're earmarked to get it and they take their overhead.
Yeah. If you are publishing, if you are teaching, if you have this well-rounded experience in academia, like fulfilling your quota, so to speak, in each of these buckets can be really engaging. You teach a few classes a year, you write a paper, you go to a conference, you present, you maybe receive a grant. Like it makes sense when everything is working. Things don't work on the same timeline, which can be frustrating. The other part of this, though, to get back to like the totality so that you understand the relationship is that's assuming that you get a job or that you find an opportunity that is going to set you up for this very traditional pathway to work on fitting all of these metrics so that you can earn your promotion and eventual tenure. The reality is that those lines within universities have been decreasing. The market has been saturated. And so we're all competing for the affection of this glorified, beautiful idea of a job. And then once you get a tenure, you get a job for life, which who doesn't want that, right? Like that sounds cushy. But we're competing for jobs that don't necessarily exist because people aren't retiring. The idea is that old goes out, the new comes in. The old really aren't going out, or the old might be going out, but then the university is not replacing those lines because it is expensive. So they create new categories of professors. I'm about to transfer from a research professor to a clinical track professorship at my institution, which is not a tenured line. So then what happens is everybody's looking for these jobs. You finish grad school. I mean, finishing grad school was super fun, Brett. Like those last couple weeks,
So fun.
we were having the best time. The world was our oyster, even though we were like, what are we going to do? But like, you've done all of this work to become a doctor. You've spent all of this time. There's been so much praise, even I think in folks, maybe self-included, where you have a small like support system, but like everyone, there's all this momentum. And then you get to that point where it's like, oh, it's time to get a job. And I'm super qualified now. And I did everything. And there are no jobs. Or they're like, you should do this thing called a postdoc, which is like basically being a grad student, but you're a doctor, but we're going to pay you a little bit more than you would have gotten in
Yeah.
grad school. But nothing that you're doing is really counting towards all of those actionable, promotionable items because you are still actively on the job market trying to get one of those other jobs. And on top of that, Brett, I know you love living in SoCal, best coast. But if you want in your particular field a postdoc to maybe eventually get a tenure track job, you need to move to Toledo for about 9 months because that's also the length of the contract. And then you might get renewed, but it's also likely that you will have to do another postdoc in, I don't know, Mississippi. And then you might get a job and then you might, and you might, and you might. And so what happens is people graduate and you take these positions that last a year, maybe 2 years at most, and you're constantly ping ponging and are at the mercy of the system and the availability of positions. And you're significantly underpaid. And what I mean by that is in grad school, I think I made annually about $21,000 a year by the time I finished. And that wasn't including my tuition. That was just what I received for my graduate or assistantship or my teaching assistantship. And by the hair on my chinny chin chin and some student loans made it through, right? Like, thank you. It was great. It was great to be paid to go to school. I have no complaints about that. I fucking loved grad school. When you leave, you are now someone who has at minimum probably 10 years of school under your belt with the doctorate. These positions are starting at $65,000 pre-tax, and they want you to live in the Bay Area or they want you to live in Manhattan. And it's just absolutely ridiculous because you get out, most of us are in, your 30s, mid 30s, upper 30s by the time you finish graduate school, and you are making less than someone who comes out with a bachelor's degree. And that's who I'm in love with. And I have been in a position now where I'm going almost into my 5th year post-graduate school, which is crazy because I told myself like I was going to get tenure 5 years out, which is an insane goal, but that's just me. About to be reviewed for promotion. I'm in a position within my institution. I'm very fortunate in that sense. We can, psychoanalyze that language. I'm so lucky. But I'm in a position where I will go up for promotion soon, but I'm not in a tenure track position. And I'm still applying for tenure track positions because at the end of the day, I'm like, ooh, I still love this idea of this thing I fell in love with when I was learning about the possibilities of being in a job that I had a lot of flexibility. I could set my own terms of what I wanted to do, how I wanted to organize my day. I could spend my time in the classroom with students. I could read, I could write about the things I wanted. And I love it so much for all of that it can do and how it like transformed me, but it doesn't often love me back, Dr. Brett.
Yeah. You mentioned postdocs, and pretty quickly into my experience at ASU in the doctoral program, I kind of got my heart set on finding a postdoc. That it was this way to continue being institutionally supported, getting paid to read, write, and think, but particularly to transform the dissertation into a book manuscript, while also having the opportunity to maybe teach a class related to my work and research, help organize a conference or present, be connected with students, but have a much lower workload. Postdocs usually only have to do 1 or 2 classes at most an academic year, have some other project that they're working on. And usually it's the book project. And that did not work out for me. There are some interesting connections here where fundamentally in a relationship, when it feels healthy and supported and it is thriving, is often because we in that relationship feel seen and validated and supported. And it's this notion of being seen that I want to talk about for a second, because one of the reasons why I believe I struggled to find a postdoc is that you and I, we both graduated from transdisciplinary programs with abstract titles. Yours a little bit more abstract than mine, although mine, even being justice studies, is something that I constantly am adding a caveat. And I just did this last night when I met some new folks where I said, my degree is justice studies, which is social justice, not criminal. which is an important clarification. But what I found was that when I was applying for postdocs in fields that align with my degree or that were one of the different disciplines that were included in the Venn diagram of transdisciplinary fields, such as gender studies, sociology, American studies, cultural geography, or a bunch of other geographies. If I would apply to a program that said they wanted interdisciplinary scholars, they still wanted their degree to be legible. And they wanted it in the whatever the title of that department was. So if it was a sociology program, they wanted seemingly interdisciplinary scholars with a sociology degree. They didn't want gender studies scholars that were doing interdisciplinary sociology adjacent work. They wanted folks who were as legible as possible. And not only did I apply to specific departments, but also I applied for a number of the like big name postdocs or scholarships and named after any number of our different robber baron philanthropists, Carnegie, yada, yada. And these places will get 1,000 applicants, 1,500 applicants, and there's no way that they can tangibly or substantively look at those applications. So there have to be criteria for weeding things out, which I understand on a technical level because they have like maybe 5 opportunities. And so you're not going to read 1,500. You have to know how do you weed them out to get to a smaller pool that you're actually going to dive into. And the easiest way to do that, if you're a gender studies program, you are going to just select all gender studies, move that to a different folder. Anyone who didn't have that degree, you're not going to look at. And what that is doing, and I think this speaks to some of what you were talking about, in order to play this game, we have to be particularly legible to the normative structures. And it is hard to do interesting or challenging work that isn't immediately and obviously legible to these different platforms, whether that's a journal or a department. And so what we are actually doing is limiting the scope of possibility within these fields in order to be normatively legible.
I think 1,000%. I so value transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary work, and I think the markets do as well. I mean, there's certainly a shift in academia where more places are embracing strange sort of chimeras of programs or ways of looking at the world, because the way that the world is structured is an ecosystem. It's not in silos. But academia is slow. It takes forever for things to happen, to become institutionalized, and bad behavior is probably the last thing to go. And so while there seems to be a lot of talk about, oh, this is something that we're looking forward to having more of this, or like you're saying, there's more calls now to have these stranger, or, which is really just, I think when somebody says like, oh, you're doing kind of weird research, it just means that it's not, neatly categorized into the box. But the other part of this too is not different from any other industry, in that it's also who you know. And I'm not trying to be conspiratorial in that, but I think you have a great example of looking at, okay, I'm applying for this named postdoc, or I'm looking for this particular position. And I might have all the qualifications, and maybe strike one against me is that I didn't have the one degree. They were looking for gender studies, but my degree was technically on paper justice studies. So I know that I did gender studies, and that's part of my concentration, or my dissertation was methodologically there maybe, but I can't represent that. So I'm getting weeded out. But then the other part of this, which is both good and bad, and something that I'm always talking to students about, which is like, you have to network. You have to put yourself out there, because just like in, I don't know, I'm thinking like Finance Bros, it's like who you know. And so if Brett is really chummy with the 5 people that are going to review that particular postdoc, or maybe you already know the professor that you'd be working with, or the department chair, putting out an email and just saying, hey, it's Dr. Brett. Really looking forward to submitting my application. Would love to talk to you. Blah, 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 blah. Like that also is an influence, if not probably one of the most direct ways that you can actually get into the system now. And that's across the board. That's when you're
Mhm.
applying for graduate programs. I always tell students, I'm like, you need to be visible. People need to see you or you're not getting in because it is so hyper competitive. It makes me think about a conversation that folks were having, I don't know, in some earnest, maybe 10 years ago when SAT and ACT was still a kind of predominant lens in which undergraduate institutions in the US were admitting students before they kind of went away from standardized test, which is like everyone that applies to Harvard, right, has like a 1500 SAT. So
Mhm.
what are you going to do that's going to make you stand out? And it's the same thing in academia, but on steroids, which is like you have to distinguish yourself through visibility by being as legible as possible, which is exceedingly difficult if you're coming from an institution, particularly like ours, which is both hailed as being a champion, an innovator, and like a place that does new and exciting work, but doesn't categorize itself according to traditional standards. So you have to really be earnest in the way that you're presenting yourself. And then on top of that, you have to face the limitations that these are just, it's an overly saturated market. So everyone is going and trying to be unique and shiny, and sometimes it really is both good and bad, the result of like, who did I know that was able to then vouch for me and at least get me in the door? And it can be soul crushing because it's hard in those moments, like very much so to the LinkedIn thing, to not see people advancing. And even if they're not even in your particular, like field, right? Like I see colleagues of mine who graduated from the same program, but we do completely different work. So I wouldn't even be applying for the same job as them. But I see them get the tenure track job, or I see someone publish in the journal that I really wanted to publish in. And a lot of times the rejection feels both random and also feels inevitable in that like there's more no's than there are ever yeses to you. And it's hard not in that situation to then internalize and say, like, what is wrong about the work that I'm doing? What am I not doing enough
Mhm.
of? How am I not being strategic enough? I should be better. Like I did it's like Elle Woods. We took the same classes. We're at the same school. Like, how am I not doing as well as you, Warner? Um, and and it's both like a product of the system itself as well as like exacerbated now because we have all these social tools as academics or as working professionals to then go on and be like, kudos to Brett, got the job today,
Mm.
blah, blah, blah. What were you doing, loser?
Yeah. And you brought up networking, which is one of my least favorite things. And I want to talk about that a little bit more. And I think that is also then going to lead us into a conversation about our favorite P word here on the pod, which is power. So we will take a quick break and then we'll come back and we will talk about power.
All right, and we're back after that nice little sting, that nice little jingle. So, Brett, tell me a little bit more about how you're thinking about networking. Yeah, I know you hate it. And maybe a little bit more about something that I know you and I talk about a lot when we're just shooting the shit and thinking about work and we're complaining, which is also what networking kind of your distaste for it, but also how it's like a representation or how you see it as this representation of like a lot of the flaws of the workplace of other
Mm.
people that folks are contributing to.
Yeah, I have always hated networking. I don't like small talk. I'm not good at it. It makes me really uncomfortable. I don't like, even though this is hilarious because we've gotten into this habit this season of starting every episode talking about the weather, but it makes me feel so shallow. Like even in work now where you pass someone in the hallway and you have just these very superficial little kind of staged moments of professional life banter,
Mm.
um, or asking how the weekend was, just these things that are not about connection. It's just transactional or just very surface level.
Yeah.
I'm of the sort of like, let's talk about our intersecting traumas. Let's get into the deep shit, or let's just not talk. It's fine. And so networking, I don't like selling myself. And I think about when I was making the transition after undergrad. So this was many lifetimes ago when I was working in the media industry. I was a video editor. I worked for a couple years at very high end well-respected, award-winning animation and design studio. Commercials, music videos, short films, and was there for a few years. And I think I'll also share some things about the politics of that workplace. Set a lot of foundations for me of what I did not want, both as a professional and seeing myself with the potential to become a manager, a lead, a boss, whatever it might be. Like, I learned a lot of lessons of who I didn't want to be based on that job. But when I left, I decided to go freelance. I'd met enough producers who were working for ad agencies or different production companies, and I wanted to see if I could make it work as a freelancer, because I would also make significantly more money being on a day rate. And so it was at that point when I knew that transition was coming. That was actually when I first joined Facebook, even though NYU was one of the first universities that had access to Facebook when it was initially
Right.
university only, and you needed a
Exposure.
university email address to sign
Yeah.
up. NYU was one of the first ones, but I had a MySpace, which I just didn't really know what to do with. I didn't love it.
Hmm. Couldn't figure out
And
like what song you wanted
I
every time.
couldn't, I'm too emo. I changed the songs constantly.
Okay.
It's funny because when we talk about curating our social media presence and things are much more permanent than they were then, I would constantly be putting up a song lyric or some emo shit as my away message on AOL Instant Messenger to let often like one person know, like, this is where my emotional state is. And that's still how I use like Instagram stories because they're fleeting.
Hmm.
But for a couple years, my partner at the time was using my email account to create a Facebook page for our one-eyed cat, Nelson. And then I took it over. And not because I wanted it for the social aspect, but because I knew I needed it for networking
Oh, okay.
and to try to get jobs. I needed to connect and have more organic ways of staying in touch with folks or letting people know, like, hey, my gig just ended. I'm open to work. And it's this very passive way of networking that now LinkedIn is filling that gap. There is absolutely a part of me that really wants to get headhunted, that wants someone to reach out and be like, hey, you're doing cool shit and we want to throw a lot of money at you to come work for us. Hasn't happened yet. I am open to it. We're looking for
The
sponsorships here
sponsors
on the pod
with the work.
and benefactors.
Is this your like top
And
notch of your like, I'd
uh,
love a patron. I'd
yeah,
love to.
and Patreon. Yes, we are open to all of those things. Um,
Some like
but
rich lord in the countryside would be like, oh, Dr. Brett, please come to my estate and fill my home with.
come do a talk at my dinner at
I
this
would
dinner
love
party.
this emo shit. Like, at dinner, I guess.
But so much of networking is it's about selling yourself, and
Yeah.
that is not something that I am comfortable with. And it doesn't feel genuine to me. And I think one of the points that I wanted to make where you left us off before the break was I want my work to speak for itself. And it is very rare that we are given the opportunity for the work to lead.
Hmm.
We have to be a personality. We have to be shilling ourselves. And to me, that often feels like it is putting the work second, or it is doing a disservice to the work if it is dependent on my ability to sell it.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel good to me.
No, I agree. It's a second shout out today to Jack. I on the faculty bio, I remember he never changed it, and people are constantly changing these, right? Every time you get a
Mm.
new accolade, it's this ongoing presentation of like, oh, I got to add more stuff. But I remember his, and I loved it. I was like, oh, I should steal that. It's so good. But it was like, like two or three things, the basics that needed to be up on the university sort of registry directory system, and then it was like Jack remains skeptical of like public bios or something at the end. I was like, brilliant, like this person is like, I just don't give a shit about this. And I feel similar. I also really don't like small talk. I think I've increasingly been sending you the memes of like, I'm such a weirdo, but until I really trust you, you don't get the full version of me. Everyone else is just getting like I don't know, the cover letter. And then as soon as we're friends, then I want to talk to you about anything and show you my strangeness. I don't feel that with colleagues. I think networking, the idea of walking into a room full of people where the main interface is the labor that we're producing, Because that's the other thing, I think, especially in academic situations, it's very rare that people will lead a conversation of, what are you teaching right now? Or,
Mm,
tell me something that a student recently told you about, or like, what are you reading? What's on your mind? What are you thinking about? It's usually
yeah.
always like something to do with, oh, did you hear that Brett recently got a promotion? Or did you see that this person just joined us as the faculty and this is where they were before? And then it's, oh, what do you do? And then it's sort of those classic lines of questions that is very dependent on what we've talked about, which is difficult, of saying like who you are, and how to make your research, especially if it's more obscure, and it's not neatly packaged into a box. Like, how do you make that legible to someone? How do you make that compelling so that they're interested in maybe asking you a follow up and not just immediately talking about
Mm,
themselves? And then it'll go to really surface level things or the petty dramas of the workplace, which, don't get me wrong, I love a water cooler session to talk about the ins and outs of the job, but it's not sustaining, and it does feel really self-congratulatory. It feels that you have to make yourself into this larger than life personality that also assumes that you're good at everything, because as soon as someone catches whiff, it's like, sharks and with blood in the water, like that maybe you're not confident or you're not presenting as the most expert, the biggest expert in XYZ. Somebody else is going to try to fill that gap and like position themselves there, which is part of the system, but also feels really difficult because, I think more times than not, I leave functions like this thinking, man, I should have done that, or I should have said this, or why didn't I lead with that? Because actually, like, this would have been a great way to demonstrate that I can be taken seriously in this space. And I recently had a conversation with a colleague, and I do want to bring this up because it was really helpful about thinking through why sometimes I feel so compelled to stay in this system and
mm,
and to contribute is as much of the love of what I do fundamentally at its core of what academia can offer, as it is this like consistent feeling of wanting to be taken seriously in a system that at least feels like it's not, and trying to prove that like worthiness in a system that like, oh, the next publication I get, if I just get one more book contract this year, or as soon as I get promoted from this position to the next one, then I will finally have stability. Or as soon as I do this, then like I will be taken seriously, because you spend so much time in this model in the academic community, which is very like apprentice based, where you're constantly trying to move up to, more rings on the ladder. Spend so much time trying to demonstrate that you have the credentials, but then it's not enough just to have the credentials. It's not enough to get the PhD. Then you have to get the postdoc, to get the assistant, to get the associate, to get the full, to continue. And it's just sort of this never ending upward ladder of just constantly trying to prove why someone should be taking you seriously,
mhm,
because the system is so external. And in the context of what you said, which is like, I think my work should speak for itself. It's so true, Dr. Brett. And I feel really similar. It's one of those like surviving purely out of spite things that we've talked about.
mm,
But it was also the advice that I got from my mentors and advisors, coming from a program that was more obscure and had too many names in its degree. Like, my degree looks like a made up degree from a made up college because we added every possible fucking ingredient we could to what we called it. People were like, if you do good work and you do good work, that will get you past. Just publish, get the grant, do the thing, the work will speak for itself. And I fundamentally believe that because I'm proud of the work that I do. And I think like the body that I've produced is something that, like, not to be LinkedIn or like self gratuitous of like, oh, I do have pride in that. And I'm like, yeah, like I did get that contract, or I did publish there. And I did the thing that, us Nicole thought was impossible. But at the same time, if that were true, not only for myself, but so many people that I know that are like in all these different tiers, if that were true, then we would have the jobs. We wouldn't be worried about having to move to the next city next year, or how we were going to make the salary work, or what was the next thing we needed to do to be taken seriously, because it's like the work is happening and people are producing. And I would be the first to say that the people that I know probably do way more than I do, and like complain a lot less. And yet that doesn't move the needle for most people. It still feels like this constant race
Uh-huh.
to produce and produce and produce. And that's also like kind of soul sucking, being like, okay, I know that I just need to keep the course, and I need to keep producing, and the work will eventually be what I will look back on. And and I will see the path more clearly. But I also know that the reality of that is that in live time, it's very deflating. And going back to this part of saturation, like not everyone who publishes or does it like stays. And there's a reason why a lot of people, like talking about relationships, I see a lot more on social media in my algorithm of people being like, why I broke up with academia. And like people leave. There's a lot of people, and I don't know, probably smarter people than I am, that are like, I'm not fucking doing this anymore.
I think I want to be where you're at of believing that like the work will eventually speak for itself. I'm a bit cynical. I am the merchant of despair after all.
The purveyor of this.
Purveyor of despair. Thank you. I think we have to recognize that live in a scarcity environment. There's only so many jobs to go around. There's only so many positions, like you talked about. And I want to believe that the work speaks for itself, but I also look around, and the people who are advancing are not doing the best work. They're the ones who sell themselves most effectively, or it's nepotism. They have the best connections, where uh, the shitty people that advanced before them are like dragging up the shit with them. And this is, I think, where I want to transition a little bit into talking about power in the workplace, and thinking about that the workplace is the game that you have to be willing to play or not. And I mentioned this animation studio that I used to work for. There were, I want to say, I think 7 partners that started this company. And there was the executive director, who once said one of the most cruel things I have ever heard in the workplace, which was, I need you to be smarter, he said to me.
To you?
Yeah. Well, had started taking on some like producing roles, and I had like made this spreadsheet, and like, fuck, I didn't know how to use Excel. I was never taught how to use it. And he didn't like that I wasn't using a particular function, and said to me, like, I need you to be smarter. And what I should have said was, I need you to get fucked, but I didn't. But I do think about like going back and finding him and telling him he's a piece of shit. So maybe he's listening to the pod. So there's one executive director, and then the other 6 people were 3 literal partners, 3 people, like folks who were in relationships with each other. And because of that dynamic, because they spent their entire work lives together, they expected that everyone else, that the job was their life, that you were going to work all hours of the day and night, like you were going to stay, after 5 or 6, start to drink a beer, eat a pot cookie, and keep working. And it may get more casual, but you were still working. Whereas at 6 o'clock, unless something was delivering that night, I was out the door because I wanted to go see my partner who didn't work there.
Sure.
And it was these expectations that the job is your life, and that this should be your first priority. And for folks who it wasn't, did not receive the same kinds of opportunities, or were not told that like you will advance. They were also incredibly shitty with hiring like just out of art school grads to do the most like nitty gritty, it's called rotoscoping, where you have to like, basically it's like hand cutting out people from green screens, or like cutting out images so that you could put digital effects onto it. It is very tedious work, and it was underpaid, and they were just burned through folks because they knew there was an endless supply of graduates coming out of art school. And it was just showing folks that they were not valued in the workplace. They were replaceable. We talked about work won't love you back. And one of the things that I tell when I am doing mentorship meetings with grad students, with younger professionals here, and it's something that I myself have not internalized well. And I tell that to folks also, that do what I say, not what I do. But knowing the fact that that in most workplaces, if you died on the way to work, they're posting your role the next day. Or here they have to wait till Thursday to post new jobs. But we are expendable, and we think a lot more of our jobs than they think of us. We want to think that we are unique, that we are important. And like, yeah, maybe we bring a particular perspective and the work would look different if someone else were doing it, but we are all fundamentally replaceable.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a like bleak thing, like I just imagine you as the purveyor of despair, as the like skeleton taking across the
The river Styx.
yeah, like that scene in Hercules when they're in the underworld. But yeah. But I'm like, no, I think I know what you're saying and I agree with it. I've also had plenty of people in academia, which I should be fair, like I've had many other jobs outside of this, but this is the one I'm in now, and this is what I call my professions. Like
And this is what you've been working towards.
folks can come at me, but we can shoot the shit about call centers and any number of bad jobs. Am I in a bad job right now? I'm just letting you all, you tell me if my relationship is bad. She says, knowing like she can't say it herself.
We never know who's listening.
But I've had a number of people in academia glorify exactly what you're talking about at that company you were working at, which is you have to double down. Like if you actually really want to do well, or if you want to commit, that means until you achieve, and it's usually they would put it in the context of until you get tenure, like you better be working 80, 90 hours a week. And I think we've talked about it before when we were describing, hustle culture and like burnout, of this
Yeah.
glorification of just doing more is something that a lot of people really valorize. I think it's no different in academia. I have personally always felt a pushback to that because I don't find that I can be creative and present 100% of the time. I don't know how people approach this now with chat or other generative AI, but like I'm not interested in just having something write for me all the time. And if I'm writing an article and I'm thinking like I can't do that for 12 hours in the span of a
Yeah.
day, just sit at the typewriter and bleed, so to speak. Like you have to go out in the world and do other things. And so I've never appreciated that. But I always thought that there were enough people who also thought the same way that I did. And I've kind of, I think, gone a bit more onto the skeptical side as you do of like, how replaceable am I? And it actually isn't because that the work feels endless, but it's the way that in academia, I have seen people who have been at the level slightly higher than I on the ladder get to the big thing, and the way that they've just fucking thrown other people under the bus. So like, again, for non-academic listeners, the idea that you can receive tenure means that you essentially you've demonstrated all of the qualities, you've published enough, you've met all of the metrics, the teaching service, research funding, etc., to say that like you have made impact in your field. And in the US, it's, you go from an assistant professor to an associate professor, which means you've demonstrated national impact. And then to go from associate to full, you have to demonstrate global. But at the associate level is when you get tenure. You get the big thing that people love and hate, but most people know about, which is like job for life. I have always thought that like, and the people that were like right there above me on the ladder, it was like, we don't have it. We're working towards it. It's like Sisyphus, like pushing the rock up. But as soon as you get to the top, you're like, oh, I'm going to do something differently. Some people do, but a lot of people get to that level. And I've experienced with colleagues, and I feel like it's more heartbreaking than like people telling me to just like grind and be a boss, like, and just work until I die. Those people get to it, and then they immediately forget that they have a position that would allow them to make things different for other people underneath. Just kind of feels like, I don't know, it feels like they entered a different room and then suddenly have amnesia about all of these sort of lofty goals or these stated things, which in the context of university often relates to like DEI and first gen and being really aware of social dynamics and positionality and all of these sort of woke terminology, but these ideas that fundamentally come down to like, the system is problematic. We reward bad behavior. There are power asymmetries. We're not treating people who don't have positions protected in the institution. We're not protecting the most vulnerable. We need to do more. So then you get to that level of power, and then you just join the other side. It's like you forgot, and you're like, well, I've got my jacket on now. I'm part of the club, and y'all just need to work harder, and then you'll be up here. It's like, and I did my time, and now I've done so much that I could not possibly be bothered to care about you anymore. And that's where I feel expendable.
Yeah. And this was a lesson that I learned in our grad program, in seeing how some folks chose to engage mentorship or advising And particularly in academia, there is this frame of mind or this particular approach to mentorship that as the seasoned professional or the seasoned academic, I was put through the ringer. I had to muck through the shit in order to get to where I am now. And it's my responsibility to now
Yeah.
put you through the shit. Like
Right.
you have to run the gauntlet in order to get through this because that's how this system works.
Right.
Instead, now my approach to mentorship, which I even began in our grad programs where I had the opportunity to mentor officially or not PhD students as they were coming in, the cohorts behind me, where we've talked about this, that like we shared documents. You know, once we got a document from a colleague of ours that was so incredibly helpful, we made sure that everybody had it. And I shifted my orientations after that moment because I was like, it is so easy to make this easier for folks. And why would I want to make it harder? Like that doesn't make me feel good. And so the analogy that I always use is that if I struggle to get through the door, I'm not going to slam it behind me to ensure that everyone coming up behind me like has the same or worse experience. Like that doesn't benefit anybody. It doesn't make me feel good. It does not create the kind of culture I want to be a part of. So if I struggle to get through the door, I'm going to stand there and hold it open.
Mhm.
And as everyone walks through it, I'm going to tell them the lessons I learned along the way. And how many academics have you and I worked with or studied under that are teaching social justice? They are teaching gender studies and feminism, but the lived experience of engaging with them, either as professionals, as mentors, is so in contrast to
Mhm.
the content that they teach that it
Yeah.
is almost offensive that they have the
100%.
gall to teach what they are teaching when they are not living what they're teaching.
And sometimes it's the people that love to sort of have the loudest bark, so to speak, about social justice or
Yeah.
about this, that themselves are the most, you want to talk about mid, like relationship mid people? I'm like, they are the most lackluster folks in actually putting that into practice. Like
Yeah.
they have the loudest bark, but they don't do anything, or in fact, they are actually antagonizing and contributing to that system.
Or to take it a step further, causing harm and violence because they're using their oratory skills and their ability to talk the language of these fields. And then they use that to gain trust and then are causing harm,
Sure.
either emotional harm, psychological harm, or sexual violence.
Yeah, the professors that I had who were the most willing to invest time in me and help me and also who had topics that I do think are of value and that they've contributed valuable things to as it relates to social justice or thinking about systems of oppression. Like you said, use that, those are the same professors that hit on me as soon as they could,
Yeah.
and use that position of power to take advantage of people that were impressionable and people at the end of the day too who in academia, particularly in those early career places where I find myself, where my friends, my colleagues are, and sometimes not quickly. Like these things don't, these timelines don't end. You think,
Mhm.
oh, maybe it takes me 18 months to get a job. I mean, I've known people that have had postdocs for 10 years before they got to the next
Damn.
thing. Not to mention that if you, within academia, at most institutions, you have a clock. So let's say I did get that tenure track position. You can only apply so many times for promotion before they kick you out and you can't ever work there again. And that's just in the US. That's not internationally. Every system is different. But like you are in a precarious position and these are the people that often prey on you in sometimes the most disgusting ways. Like the people that have hit on me and have taken advantage of in that, it's horrible. But then they also are the people that when I say like, hey, this student, your student is treating me with some disrespect and you're the chair on that person's committee,
Mm.
or, I think we need to level set and make sure that the everybody is, receiving the due trust. Those are also the people that will go and say, oh, well, you're not really an expert yet in your field and you're just this on the
Yeah.
committee. You're just a reader. You're just a member. So why would I take you seriously? And I
Mm.
think those are both forms of harm in very different ways. But yeah, those are also the people that, at least from my experience, where when I knew them in a different capacity or before they had reached that level of protection were the people that I trusted who also inspired me to think about things from a lens of social justice and from a lens
Mhm.
of transformation the most.
Yeah. And it's this disturbing wielding of power where often we see power in its most traditional sense that it is power over. It is folks using it to manipulate, to control, to cause harm, and also to protect the institution. And that is because of maybe a felt sense of vulnerability in the institution, of precarity in their positions, or that even when you hit tenure, there are still other aspirations. There's still different degrees of tenure,
Yeah.
like you were saying, in these different roles. Something that I've come to learn and understand now. I work at a public institution on the student affairs side. When I was applying for roles, there's always a new language that you have to learn because departments and institutions will call things differently. So learning like what do different titles mean. So as I was applying for student affairs adjacent roles or the advocacy positions like I'm currently doing, I had to learn sometimes coordinator would actually be a very high level position, but I thought of a coordinator as being kind of entry level. Or at California public institutions, so I'm an assistant director, which is the essentially the highest level within my particular union before, like if I were to try to get a promotion or advance, the next step for me would be associate director. But associate directors and directors are not in a union. They're what's
Okay.
considered management, MPPs. I'm not actually sure what the second management professional something. I don't know what
People?
the second P, management professional people. And so when you, to be an MPP or in management, you are not in a union. And then it's, director, associate or assistant, vice president, president is kind of the hierarchy of things. There isn't a ton of incentive for me to leave the protections of a union because in a lot of ways, when you become management, there has to be some level of priority shift where as a manager, you become, and I'm not saying this is what I've seen blanketed because there are absolutely exceptions, but to some extent, you become more about the institution than you do about serving students, patients, survivors, whatever the demographic might be, or serving staff, if that's the role that you're in. There has to be a shift where you are a little bit more invested in policy and procedure than impact and outcome.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, that's not interesting to me. Similarly, I think the way that folks use their positionality as an MPP, it's not a one-to-one thinking about tenure track folks because folks who have tenure have that protection. It's as if they were in a union where you are protected. And those are the folks that we think would then use their position of power and access to try to make things better. But we often see them using that position to cause harm.
Sure. Or sometimes even worse, just to check out and say, like,
Yes.
"Oh,
It's like I've run the gauntlet and now I'm just going to live a life of luxury and ease in this
no."
position, or just go inward, focus on my own projects
Right.
and not use it as a position to make things better or different or fight. We see a lot of folks not wanting to take up the fight because they're tired. That's what the system does is it runs us down. And then when we are given the luxury of position and power, we don't do anything with it.
I'm thinking about this continuously through this metaphor of relationships. And I'm like, I keep thinking if this was a Taylor Swift era,
Mm.
like this is our tortured poets because it's all over the fucking place. And there's like so many red flags and it's too long and, hyperinflated, but some bangers that keep you interested just enough. I mean,
Mm. But so
uh,
much fat. Like,
so much fat, but
yeah.
also so much I can fix him, no really I can't.
Mm.
Like I can fix him, no really I can. It's yeah, I don't know. It's certainly like maybe I should have started this episode by being like, I'm not fucking leaving. Like, I don't know.
Mm.
Uh Leonardo DiCaprio like in Wolf of Wall Street, which I know you probably hate that movie, but
I actually have not seen it. And
Bet you would hate it,
Yeah,
actually.
and that's why I haven't seen it. I think it came out shortly after Occupy, and I was just like, I'm not I don't
Yeah.
think I have anything to gain from watching this movie,
Well,
and probably a lot to lose.
you would knowing you, you would hate it, but knowing me, Dr. Brett, I do love it. But it's also a great encapsulation of like I still love academia. I feel like I can fix it. Um and I don't know, maybe that's also the I don't know, the internal mental gymnastics that you do with yourself. Because I do agree with you of how much pain comes through being engaged in this kind of work should make the calculus pretty easy to say, like, you're not paid enough. Like I talked about postdocs not making enough. By the time you actually do get to a professorship, it's unequal, it's not transparent. It's very rare that you can actually understand what your colleagues make proportionate to you. And every thing that you can think about from gender to ethnicity to name it, like that would exist in discrepancy in pay also is in academia, but it's all shielded most of the time. So you don't know.
Mm.
So you're underpaid then. You would think that these kinds of ticks would make the calculation such that you don't want to leave. But I also think like I like it a lot. And I feel like I have a responsibility to leave it better than I found it. I love what you talk about. We've talked about it before on the pod of like the way that we got through grad school was together.
Mm.
And like by the time I was done with my PhD, what I was so tremendously happy about was how many people were in my community and how like people held me accountable to show up for them. I felt like vice versa. I was showing up and asking people to show up for me in a particular way. I had that language and I just felt so happy in those moments where we got through it together because we weren't gatekeeping and we weren't holding it to ourselves. And I
Yeah.
also feel like those small moments where I do feel loved or, something happens and I'm like, oh, this is enough to stay. Sometimes as is also the work itself, like what I'm producing. The work speaks for itself. But I tell myself that like leaving it better of thinking intentionally, like you said, like I'm not going to slam the door or I'm not going to make it more difficult is that notion of like, oh, that was really hard. So what do you have to then do? And it is extra work and you don't always get it right, but like what do I have to do? What do you have to do next to like ensure that you're not putting that forward? And I guess like that's a lot of labor and it can be really frustrating and feels like it shouldn't be that hard. Like if something does love you back, like you talked about good relationships, if something is healthy, like it shouldn't be a struggle. But I think about like what it takes because I know better, because I've done it, because it
Mhm.
feels easier in some ways now of like how do I then create that for other people or the places even more so where people have done that for me. And I would say like probably as I'm closing and people are gonna be like, if there's a poll, should Nicole break up with Jack? Like maybe I'll go to a
Ooh,
Spotify
listener poll. Nice.
listener poll. Okay, like is this a toxic relationship? Should they leave? Sometimes I stay because I see people do that and it's how I'm impacted by it. It's how I see other people. And it's so tremendously energizing because then it's so much easier. And I think about like we edited our manuscripts together. And even though we're in different spots of how that, in the publication process, like I felt so empowered when I could share space and ideas with you
Mm.
and work on that together. Or like when a student comes in and asks for advice and I can be like, let me give you it straight. Like, let's talk through this. Like
Yeah.
it's so exciting. And then to hear somebody achieve their goals, I get really energized by that. I feed off of people's success or using this, like understanding the system enough to reclaim some of that power, but then also to give it forward. It kind of feels like if I was in a movie, I'm like, okay, this is how we're gonna
Mhm.
fuck the system. And that I suppose is like enough to keep me as well as like, when I do get cited and my Google scholar citation goes up, that I guess is enough for me to stay, even though like a lot of the times I'm just like, oh no, like it's not me, it's definitely you.
So a lot of my work and research is around ideas of home and how we construct that for ourselves and um, thinking about work as a place where we do try to come to feel at home and want to feel productive and valued. And I think exactly like what you're saying, one of the ways that I talk about how we construct home is in opposition to what we've known of home before. thinking about families of origin, homes of origin. That is, to quote James Tyner, a very impactful book, is that home is the place where most of us first come to learn violence. And the workplace is where we often experience and learn violence in different ways. And so you're talking about taking this opportunity to create an idea of work or of academia differently for yourself and for the folks that you have in your spheres of influence. And I did a presentation just a couple days ago on homework, the concept of my dissertation. And one of the things that I was asking folks to do in that presentation was to think about the people, places, experiences, feelings that come to mind when they think about home in these expansive ways. And I give examples for myself because I always tell folks, I'm not going to ask you to do labor that I'm not willing to do myself first, especially if it is more vulnerable. And I was telling little stories related to people and experiences. And afterwards, one of the grad students who I have had the privilege of mentoring over the last year or so came up to me and said, I need you to know that you are one of the people I think of when I think of home. And I was like, this is so meaningful to me right now.
Yeah.
And I also need you to go away. Like the next session was like starting, and this was the second part of it. And I was like, I'm going to start crying right now, like in the best way. And I was like, this is so meaningful to me. And I will replay that moment in my head as I continue to struggle through doing this work and as I continue to struggle with my personal struggles. But it shows the power that we have when we commit to be decent and caring and try to do things differently than what we've seen. And I think with that thought, we will take a quick little break and we will come back for our closing segment, more comment than a question.
Oh. All right. Welcome back, folks, to our signature closing segment, more comment than a question. And no, as always, we are not taking any follow-ups. This week, I wanted to offer, I spent a lot of time complaining about something that doesn't love me back. And one of the other things that I failed to mention on our conversation is the strategy that I work is also just trying not to find my value in my work, which should be self-evident as somebody who's read a lot of Karl Marx, that labor should not define me. And I think one of the things that I've really tried to tap into in recent times, and that I would just say is really fun, is writing for fun and doing creative projects. I recently bought on Facebook Marketplace a vintage typewriter, and it brings me so much joy to tip, 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 tip. And it was really inexpensive. And so it's, kind of one of those classic one man's trash is another's treasure. And so I would just say, like, something that I do is I lean into the things that do bring me joy, and getting off of the screen, activating a different part of my brain and embracing just a underappreciated old technology it's really doing it for me. It's really like the muses are taking me, Dr. Brett. So I just wanted to shout out to the old man that I bought this typewriter who did not know how good of a deal I was getting. But yeah, that's my more of a comment than a question.
That I really want to ask if you've gotten an angry note from your neighbors yet of like, knock off the clickety clacks, but I can't ask that question, so I'm not going to. My more comment than a question, as we find ourselves somewhere in the second half of season 2 of the pod, and talking a little bit at the end of this week's episode about ideas of home. My comment on this Sunday morning as we are recording this ep, I'm feeling a little sentimental. So I just wanted to say, Nicole, you are one of the people that I think of when I think of home, and I will not be taking follow-ups.
Damn it. You said that. Okay. Wow. I don't think I've been outed in the I don't think that anybody has so beautifully taken advantage of the parameters of the system since a one Dr. Gabby Lout. But wow. Okay. I'm not allowed to comment. On that note, folks, thank you for joining. We hope that you enjoyed this week's episode. As always, if you like us, or maybe you think of us as home, feel free to share that pod, like and subscribe, and just respond to the poll that we're gonna put out there. We would love to hear from you. We've got a lot of exciting perspectives, ideas, and maybe new voices coming this season that we're very happy to share with you all very soon. So please do us a favor and continue to tell other people about the podcast. And we will be back very shortly in your ears starting next week. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Doc to Doc is co-hosted, written, produced, and edited by us, Dr. Brett S. Goldberg and Dr. Nicole K. Mayberry. Our original music was written and performed by Matt Bogdanow, and our original artwork was illustrated by Andre Gonzalez. Doc to Doc is an independent podcast and a conversation across place, perspective, and friendship. We record Doc to Doc between Washington, D.C. and Orange County, California. In Washington, D.C., we record on the ancestral lands of the Nacotchtank Anacostans, also known as the Anacostan or Nacotchtank peoples, and near the lands of the Piscataway and Pamunkey peoples. In Orange County, we record on the traditional and unceded lands and waters of the Hashemann and Tongva tribal nations.